Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch, and welcome today to the first 10-round watch boxing special in ages. But it's not Fury versus Joshua, it's Tyson versus Bruno, as two 1980s classics go head to head, and only one of them will survive to claim the crown of
Best retro grouchy 1980s design lightweight shockproof resin-cased electroluminescent backlit digital displayed sports and exercise watch.
a title I'm sure they've both been coveting for many years. Today it's Casio versus Timex. When I unboxed the Timex Ironman Triathlon Endure 30 Original, which is actually its full name, a couple of weeks ago, I said that if you were looking for a no-nonsense digital watch for sports and exercise, then it gave the basic square G-Shock a real run for its money. Today we find out how close the two watches actually are and which one you should buy, assuming you should actually buy either of them. I'll leave links to both in the description of the video, but of course, do your own research, find the best price for you, your local region, your local currency. Let's get on with it. All right, here we go then. First head to head in the new studio, and what a pair of watches, what a pair of absolute classics. Timex Ironman from 1986, Casio DW5600 from 1987. And check out the original advert for the Ironman. It was a simpler time back then. All you had to do to sell a watch was show a few of the features and then present it in a fist punching through a wall. Or in the case of the G-Shock, simply have an ice hockey player whack it with a stick. Two adverts as classic as the watches they were trying to sell you. And you know, the fact that these two are still on sale virtually unchanged 40 years later, I think speaks volumes about how good they actually are. And I bet proportionally anyway that in today's money they're a lot cheaper than they were back in the mid-80s. So what we're going to do then, well, it's the usual format, 10 rounds, 2 of them double weighted, but one of them in brackets today. I'll get onto that in just a second. And this one, Toughness. Now, these are both pretty rugged in their own right. You would expect the G-Shock perhaps to be the more rugged of the two though. I'm not going to torture test them, but I found someone who did. I found a post on Watch Crunch from a chap called Matthew, calling himself Digital Divider, who torture tested these two exact watches 2 years ago. Now, I can't personally verify his results, which is why in brackets today, I'm not going to include them in the final count here, but fascinating to see how much abuse these two were actually able to take. Alright then, let's start with the most obvious one. Let's start with price. They're both very well priced and they're both quite closely priced. However, Timex gets a 7 out of 10 double to 14 for its price. Casio gets a 9, that's not a 4, that's a 9 out of 10 doubled to 18. Now, there is a reason why I say always check the price in your local region, your local currency, and that's because prices vary considerably depending on where you are. In the USA, for example, you can buy the Ironman on eBay for $50, whereas here in Australia, the same watch costs 133 Aussie. Having said that, I bought mine on a bit of a deal for $100 in the middle of last month, so do shop around always. The Casio, on the other hand, seems to be 10 to 15% cheaper on average. Just over $40 on eBay.com, but here in Australia I'm struggling to get one for much under 120 Aussie. Let's be honest, great prices on both, but like I said, the Casio undercuts the Timex, hence the 2 extra points. And moving on to a category I do not normally include, that being packaging. Again, Timex falling behind with a fairly average 5, Casio an 8. The Timex scored a 5 because the packaging is very, very average, even considering the price paid for it. Tiny, flimsy little cardboard box, and one of those standard crystal stands here. At least you get a few extra tags and a little instruction manual tucked in. No better than a $20 Casio though, 5 out of 10. But the G-Shock gets an 8, not because of the relative scale of its cardboard box, but because of what lies within it. And what lies within it is a G-Shock tin. Who doesn't love a little bit of extra merch in the form of some improved packaging? These are great. Not only do they protect it in transit, but they also look cool on a shelf. All the usual stuff in there. Definitely worthy of a couple of extra points. 8 out of 10. Alright, so you bought and paid for them and you have taken them out of the packaging. What then do these watches do? What features do they offer? Well, the two feature sets are fairly similar, to be honest, and both a little bit basic by today's standards, but I reckon the Timex is worth an extra point compared to the Casio. So the Timex has a large 2-line LCD display, 4 buttons on the corners of the case, kind of standard, but it also has 2 additional buttons on the front primarily controlling the chronograph. It does have a countdown timer and a single alarm, as you'd expect from this type of watch, but there are a couple of extra little features that get it that bonus point over the Casio. The first is a kind of sneaky, covert second time zone. You set a second time zone which you then access by pressing those buttons on the front. You can see it just flashes up T2 and shows you the time in a second time zone. Yeah, kind of sneaky GMT, but really this one is all about the chronograph. That's why you bought one in 1987, that's probably why you'd be buying one today. Start on the front there, not the easiest button to push as you can see, but once you get it done, it means you're not going to bump it accidentally, and then you're into laps. 1 lap. 2 laps, 3 laps, 4 laps, as many laps as you can swim or you can run round a track. Press stop and then into the recall mode, allowing you then to cycle through all of those laps and check the times you've just done. By today's standards of smartwatches, it's still only worth a 6 out of 10, but it's definitely got a little bit more up its sleeve than the Casio does. Which doesn't actually have an awful lot up its sleeve, to be honest. Standard 4-button layout here again, 2-line display, just like the Timex. Single alarm, countdown timer, stopwatch, that is your lot. One feature I do like with the stopwatch though is, because of the 2-line display, you always see the home time while you are in chronograph mode. Now, believe it or not, back in the dim and distant past, I ran a few marathons with this watch on my wrist. I've had one of these Square Gs in my collection since 2007, I think I bought my first one, so I enjoyed that feature. You can fantasize about when you're going to eat your lunch when you cross the line while still working out how much misery you have just endured. So yeah, a nice little feature, but still only worth a 5 out of 10 when compared to the Timex. Alright then, on to those 2-line LCD displays. You've been looking at them for a couple of minutes now. I reckon you can probably call this one before I show you the figures. It's a win for the Timex, 8-6. The numerals may be thinner, but they're just so much bigger than the Casios. Nice, easy to read as a consequence, and pretty good viewing angles considering. The Casio's numerals may be thicker, but they are just so much smaller that this one loses 2 points here, and I don't think it's quite as legible from some extreme viewing angles as the Timex is either. Well, that was daytime legibility. What about nighttime legibility? Both of these watches feature electroluminescent backlights, thankfully. Timex brand theirs as Indiglo, whereas Casio brand theirs Illuminator. Which is better? Well, Indiglo, well respected and well renowned, has been fantastic after dark. It's another 2-point gain for the Timex. Yeah, Indiglo is a well-known standout and real asset for the brand. Pretty standard electroluminescent backlight, but the numerals are brighter than the background. So the numerals are positive against a negative background, if you see what I mean. It's easy on the eye if you're using it in darkness, which is the point, and those big numerals are very easy to read, 8 out of 10. Now, there's nothing wrong with Casio's electroluminescent backlight system, it's very effective, but it's the opposite of Indiglo. So the majority of the dial is lit, and the numerals are not. So the numerals are negative against a positive background again, if you see what I mean. It's brighter after dark, but it does take your eyes a little bit longer to adjust compared to the Indiglo, plus those small numerals aren't quite as legible, 6 out of 10. Now, both of these watches cost under $50 US and have disproportionately small lug width at 18mm. That means you're probably not going to be replacing the bands with anything that you have lying around in your collection, meaning the bands as supplied are really important. What are the scores? Well, once again, Timex gaining 2 points over the Casio with another 8-6 victory. I got a question for you. How many Ironman logos do you think Timex have managed to squeeze onto the band? Just the band. Have a guess. No, you're wrong. Unless, of course, you said 8, in which case you're right. There are 2 here, there's 1 there, there are another 2 there, and 3 there. Calm down, Timex. It's all right, we get it. But it is a really nicely made band. It's soft, it's compliant, it's comfortable, and I love the retainer, if you see what I mean. A little bit of molding either side just to hold that in place exactly where you want it to. There's some gaps for sweat here, there's those ridges for expansion and sweat, and the buckle, it looks like plastic, but it's actually metal that has been coated to match the colour of the case. Very, very nice indeed. 8 out of 10. The G-Shock band is Billy basic by comparison, it really is, but then again, that's the kind of whole utilitarian shtick of the G, is it? It's got one of the most rudimentary buckle and tangs I have ever seen on a watch. Metal though, and at least it is Casio branded underneath, Casio China. There you go. But again, plenty of sweat, holes and gaps. It's got those perforations for a little bit of stretch when required. And they're comfortable. Like I said, I've had one of these in my collection for close to 2 decades now. I've worn them heaps. They're comfy enough. 6 out of 10. Well, after a shaky start, the Timex is now on a bit of a tear, consistently pulling points off the Casio. What about the next category, wear, as in comfort to wear on wrist? Oh, back to Casio for this one, 8-7 in its favour. They're both actually pretty similar on wrist, to be honest. I mean, they both weigh exactly the same, 55 grams each, quite remarkable, and they're both made of the same material, predominantly resin with a metal case back, and the dimensions are even broadly similar as well. However, I'm going to score the G-Shock 1 point higher than the Timex because of one dimension, that dimension being thickness. Who knew the Casio would be the slimmer of the two? At its thickest point, the Casio is 13.5mm, the Timex is exactly 15mm. Many a time I have cursed my G-Shock when I've been taking a backpack on and off and it gets caught. That is going to be even worse with the Timex because it's 15% thicker. Not a huge amount in it, but enough to give the Casio the nod here. What about this semi-category here in brackets of toughness then? Well, I'll leave a link in the description to the post on Watch Crunch by Matthew, aka Digital Divider. Thank you, Matthew. He tortured these two so that I don't have to, and I mean he tortured them. First of all, he dropped a brick on each of them from a height of 3 meters. Both watches survived, but as one might expect, the Casio fared a little bit better than the Timex. He did note though that the Casio spring bar got damaged in the process. He then put them in the deep freeze for the night. Both watches survived. He then claims he strapped them to his wife's shoes while she was gardening. Both watches survived. He then put them through the washing machine. Both watches survived. And finally, the tumble dryer. Both watches survived. The take home from all of this madness is that both watches survived. Both watches will likely take far more of a beating than the average wearer is ever likely to give them. But perhaps unsurprisingly, the watch designed to take a beating will take more of a beating. The brick test really did make a mess of the Ironman's crystal, far more than the Casio's. I reckon if Matthew had been scoring them out of 10, he would have given the Casio an 8 and the Timex a 6. Anyway, moving on to brand. Look, the relative scores that each person watching this video would give Timex and Casio are all going to vary on a bunch of factors, including your own watch ownership history, your geographical location, the value you put into each of those fine and storied brands, etc, etc. But this is my channel, so these are my scores, and I'm going to give the Timex a 7 double to 14, but I'm going to give the Casio a 10 double to 20, a very rare 10. I don't give out 10s very often, and I'm going to tell you why. Look, Timex is a great brand. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking. How many budget watch taglines are indelibly branded onto the brains of millions? Not many, I'm sure. They make several ranges of well-known and well-respected affordable watches, and they are the only other brand I would seriously suggest, that you look at if you have a budget of $50 or less to spend on your next timepiece. But I have long maintained that you don't just get one brand when you buy a Casio G-Shock, you get two brands. You get Casio, who make the best budget watches on the market, and you get G-Shock into the bargain as a bonus. The G-Shock sub-brand is so strong, it can stand up on its own. It is immediately recognizable and identifiable with ruggedness, with toughness, with military culture, with street culture, with sports, and with extreme sports. And you get both of those brands, Casio and G-Shock, on your wrist for just over $40. There is nothing like this in terms of brand cachet on the market for the price. I appreciate that may have sounded a little bit gushy, but honestly, I think the G-Shock is worth a 10 and I don't give them out very often. What about an equally subjective category of X Factor then? These are two 80s classics, two dinosaurs that somehow survived the meteor. How do they stack up after 4 decades? Which one has more retro grouch cachet than the other? Well, I think they both deserve a little bit of love in that regard, hence they both get an equal 8. I reckon there would be something pretty cool about doing an Ironman in 2024, wearing an Ironman from 1986, shunning the GPS tracking and heart rate monitors that are all the rage these days. It would be like Rocky working out with logs rather than Ivan Drago being hooked up to all kinds of machines. So, in the right set of circumstances, the Ironman definitely worth an 8 for X Factor. Similarly, the Square G is, in my humble opinion, a design classic, and unlike the Ironman, it hasn't really been superseded. Perhaps you could say that the Bluetooth and solar versions, of which I own several, are the current go-to for this style of watch, but this one really still is the essence of G. It's still the purest form of the ideas of toughness, ruggedness, and utility that this watch was birthed from. And I'm delighted to say that you can still buy one of these for a little over $40 in 2024. Just remarkable. So, where does that leave us then? Well, it leaves us with two fantastic watches that you can buy for fantastic prices. But there can only be one winner. And just as everybody loved Frank Bruno, he still got his ass kicked by Mike Tyson, did he not? And the Timex, as good as that score is, 78 out of 110, which makes a 71% score, an excellent score, it's not as good as the Casio's 85 out of 110, giving a percentage of 77. Look, the Timex Ironman is great. I used to have one, I used to wear it running because of those big, easy to read numerals, and I would probably have done an Ironman in mine if I had ever learned to swim properly, because clearly that was the only thing stopping me. And really, if you see something here that you prefer over the Casio, or if for some reason you're turned off by the G-Shock branding, then by all means go for it. But for me, the 5600 is still number one. Not only is it a little bit cheaper, but it has all the features that 99.9% of the people buying one, i.e. everybody who doesn't do Ironman triathlons, will actually use. Plus it has the extra ruggedness that you only get from a G-Shock. And you get a G-Shock. No matter what you think of these guys, no matter what you think of the likes of Ed Sheeran and John Mayer, and believe me, I own music by neither of them, these guys love their watches. They have all the money in the world and can wear whatever watches they want to, and occasionally at least, they want to wear G-Shocks. This 5600 is pretty much the original G, definitely the cheapest G, and arguably the purest G. So there you have it, well done for making it all the way to the back end of this particular boxing match. If you want to watch another one, click here or here. Thanks for watching this one, I'll see you in the next one.